Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about how Goth died in context to Dungeons and Dragons. All right, so what the heck does Dungeons and Dragons have to do with Goth? Well, it has a setting that's pretty goth in itself, and that is Ravenloft. But even more importantly than that, I have been reading through Vecna Eve of Ruin, and it has Ravenloft in it, and it immediately, and once I started reading about Lord Strahd, right? This vampire king. I remembered Vampire the Masquerade, right? And I think we should take a moment to remember one of the biggest, most aggressive, most dangerous competitors Dungeons and Dragons ever had, and that was Vampire the Masquerade. So let's talk about what Vampire Masquerade actually was, and how it was tied to the Goth movement, and how Goth died, All right, here we go. Let's jump into this. All right. So first of all, it was Mark Reinhagen was the creator of Dungeons and Dragons. Was the creator of Vampire the Masquerade. Vampire the Masquerade broke out in the early '90s, I believe, and it just exploded onto the scene, right? And it had Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf, the Forsaken. Yeah, I think so. And then it had Mage, it had Mummy, it had Changeling, it had it was extremely successful, and they pumped out a ton of books. An absolute ton of books, right? And people were playing this tabletop role-playing game, and it was a serious threat, right? It was exploding and new and fresh right in the 90s, exactly when Dungeons and Dragons was hitting huge competition for video games, and had been out for like 2 decades, right? And was starting to feel long in the tooth, right? And was struggling a little, was literally struggling to get engagement, keep engagement. It was a difficult time, right? And so this game was coming up and had massive, very real engagement, while Dungeons and Dragons was struggling, right? Very, very real issue, right? In the 90s, okay. In addition to that, Vampire the Masquerade accomplished something that Dungeons and Dragons had never, ever accomplished. And that was like a LARP in every state, right? Every state in America. And on the East and West Coast, every state had like 3, maybe 5, maybe 7 LARPs ongoing, right? And this was people showing up in costume and live action role-playing, going beyond simple tabletop role-playing game, but live action role-playing, right? And also, you're like, wait a second, Scott, are you talking about LARP? Yes. So let's talk about the obvious here. So one, LARP never worked out, and the reason why is LARPers set very real rules for like, hey, you don't touch people, you don't bring weapons in, you don't like. I think those were the 2 biggest people. You respect boundaries. There were like 3 major rules. They were broken absolutely constantly, and I think this is why LARP has a bad reputation today, and it has not really manifested. LARP has really not manifested on the Dungeons and Dragons side, because I'll say this. I think Dungeons and Dragons participants were a lot smarter on average than Vampire the Masquerade, and we could just see, we're like, okay, LARP is interesting, but it seems outrageously dangerous. It would be dangerous if people follow the rules, but these, on the Vampire Masquerade LARPs, go find somebody. Go find a Vampire Masquerade LARPer and ask them if they, if rules were broken at the LARP. They'd be like, I'm not sure I ever remember seeing anybody follow them, right? Like, it was really, really bad. That's my recollection. If you're from the Vampire Masquerade LARPs, and you'd like to tell me I'm wrong, I'm here to listen. But that's exactly what I remembered. And I had several friends who went very, very deep into this and very much said the same thing. Said that they saw marriages broken up. They saw, all kinds of like and actually the weapon thing, right? Like people straight be bringing weapons to these labs all the time. I never heard a story where anybody got hurt, but it definitely could have happened. And with as much drama was at these things, people were like, yeah, this was not a good idea to be bringing weapons into these locations. It was really something. It was pretty wild. And let me be super clear. None of this was done was done in connection to White Wolf, right? Like everybody just bought the books and did their own thing, right? Like White Wolf was not signing off on any of this, to my recollection. This was the LARP community that was doing this, and that's just my opinion on what occurred, right? All right, so let's keep rolling here. So so we just talked about the bad part of LARP. There were times of immersion, right? Like that's one thing and the immersion was much deeper than anything we had accomplished in Dungeons and Dragons, right? The idea that if you fill a house full of people who are all in garb and all committed to playing their character, that could be pretty incredibly immersive. So that's one area where Vampire the Masquerade really like surpassed Dungeons and Dragons. It was a big deal, right? So here's the kicker, right? Now, not only did the Vampire the Masquerade LARPs really impact tabletop role-playing games significantly and gave Dungeons and Dragons one of its few competitors in the decades that it's been competing, right? In fact, Vampire the Masquerade definitely top 3 competitors for Dungeons and Dragons of all time. It was very real. People were very significantly impacted. Like their TTRPG lives were very much impacted, right? So it was very real and it was a thing. In addition to that, it really helped in America the goth scene grow, right? I actually think very much Vampire the Masquerade LARPs, which were in every state in America, on the east and west coast. I think every single state in the U.S. on the east or west coast had 3, 5, 7 different LARP societies, right? It was incredible, right? And this fueled the goth movement in America. And the goth movement was a very real thing. It was people who are, it's like July, and they're wearing black jeans, black combat boots, black t-shirt, black leather jacket, hair is dyed black, black eye makeup, and it didn't matter if you were a man or a woman. It was a very real thing, and it was cool. I do think I never did it. I was never a goth, but it was very cool, and it was a very real transition into a different, a completely different space for America, right? And it echoed the British punk scene. There was a lot there, right? But then it died. Why did goth die? All right, so let's talk about that right now. And let's talk about how this impacts Dungeons and Dragons today. So it's really fascinating. Why did goth die? I think goth died specifically because Halloween arrived. And I mean arrived, right? So in America, we have a significant amount of evangelical Christians, and then we have a ton of people who are CE members, Christmas and Easter. They show up to church on Christmas and Easter. They're not real churchgoers. They're not even real Christians, right? But they remember that their mom or their dad or their grandma or their grandmother really loved the Lord and was a good and kind person, right? So they go to a church on Christmas and Easter, right? And so we have huge actual celebrations of Christmas, right? And Christmas is a big deal. Christmas is widely celebrated in America. Well, within the last 20 years, and it really started almost exactly at the point when the goth scene was the highest, fueled by Vampire the Masquerade, what ended up happening was Halloween arrived as a major competitor to Christmas, right? And right now, Halloween is the number 2 holiday in the world, right? It's crushed by Christmas still, right? But every year that gap closes, right? And so Halloween really arrived, and people getting in costume, and people giving out, trick-or-treat candy, and all the rituals of Halloween really arrived. And part of that was Goth, right? The entire, Goth is a celebration of dark, right? And Halloween is a celebration of dark. So the reason Goth died, I think, was people were like, listen, it's really kind of weird that you're, putting on all this, dark celebration garb in the middle of July. You don't need to, right? You're going to get a whole month of this. You're going to get 3 months of this. You're going to get an entire season, right? Starting in September, October, and you'll even have a little bit in November, right? You'll get 3 months of Goth, right? So what really happened was Goth died as a year-round thing, but it became an annual ritual, right? And people really realized, I don't need to be Goth all year round because I'm going to spend 3 months in Goth next year, right? I only need to wait 9 months and I'm going to get Goth again, right? And so that's why Goth died. And this really does impact Dungeons and Dragons. And one of the reasons why is, so how does this impact Dungeons and Dragons? I think the biggest reason is Ravenloft is still alive, still very prominent, and is in current D&D canon hardbacks because they realize this aligns perfectly with a major new holiday that is hitting every single year, which is Halloween, right? And so basically Ravenloft is alive and well because the Dungeons and Dragons team knows that there are 3 months a year now dedicated to Goth, which is really, its new name is really Halloween. So Goth did die 100%, but it was reincarnated as a 3-month ritual that happens every single year. And that is the reason that Ravenloft is alive today, and you ain't seen a whisper about Darksun. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing and have a fetch millennium.